we are live.
Oh, we're not live?
No.
It says it's going live. Oh, it says
Yeah.
we're live now. Okay.
Yeah.
Apologies. I think we might have been. I'm not sure if we actually start. Okay, I think we might be live now for the first time. So apologies,
Yeah.
everyone. Let's just do the intro again. Welcome back to the FPL Script. This is season 2, episode 29. We'll be looking at our Gameweek 28 preview, but more importantly, JD's wildcard 2. And of course, a lot of discussion to be had around free at 29 and free at 34, even from a wildcarder's perspective. As far as Gameweek 27, though, very, very dismaying week for me. 68 points. Once again, a gigantic red, and the massacre by Foden continued. So part 2 of that did come out with a Foden brace, and I had some additional injuries as well. So missed out on the Senesi clean sheet, even missed out on the chance to get Doughty's points, who was on my bench, and the Neto, of course, also got injured, which means that the Mins basically outcome of this team wasn't very good for this week, and definitely definitely didn't realize, I suppose, too many points compared to the rest of the field. So that was my week. How about yours?
Yeah. So we are restarting. So as Fran pointed out earlier, I had a great week,
Yeah.
and it is perhaps the perfect dead end. Even though I did not plan to dead end, my team, Fran has mercifully cut off the bench from being visible here, and it is atrocious because I had essentially 0 pointers on all 4 spots and 3 injuries, if I remember correctly, because I have already long forgotten what my team was last week. So for Foden doing the bulk of the work for my team because a lot of people wildcarded him out and maybe transferred him out because 3 tough fixtures. Even though I would say that United at home was definitely a much better fixture than the other two, which is what we are going to have next.
Yeah.
So hopefully this won't continue. And I think the other one was Areola 13 pointer, of course. Now it wasn't helped by the fact that Neto got 8, right? Neto, the
Yeah, and I
goalkeeper.
think, well, Kelleher and
Yeah,
Dubravka did well
Dubravka got
too.
7
Yeah.
and Keller got 9. So all in all, not that much of a gain, but also ultimately not having a clean sheet and then getting 13 is crazy. So I think
Yeah.
finally I have some just outcome for all the Allison stuff that happened. And the funny thing is, if I had planned for wildcard 28, review was suggesting a -4 to buy Netto this week or
Mm,
last week,
okay.
which is
Interesting.
to be expected because Burnley at home is perhaps the prime fixture that you want or your goalkeeper for. So completely looked into the Areola stuff, but hopefully I can carry that into the wild card as Fran said.
Yeah, no, it's fair. And as we sort of discussed today, the topics, of course, are sort of wildcard 28, but also just fixture probabilities and discussions around that. We thought it'd be good to sort of have a lay of the land in terms of what we know so far from some of our fixture gurus. Of course, their sort of understanding of the landscape is continuously updating, so this might not be perfectly up to date. I think Ben Crellin as well. He's scheduled to sort of post his update and summary of what he thinks the fixtures will be like. And of course, we can probably expect that either tomorrow morning or later this evening, depending on, of course, where you are in the world. As far as what we're seeing right in front of us, we are looking at James's fixture settings. So for the people who are listening on podcasts, the idea here is we have a binary fixtures as per James's best guess. And in terms of the uncertain fixtures that you'd be inputting, for example, into review or even just solving or even thinking about generally within the FPL landscape itself, we're expecting United versus Newcastle to land on 34, Tottenham City, Wolves and Arsenal, Brighton and Chelsea, Fulham, Liverpool, Crystal Palace, Newcastle, United versus Sheffield United as well. And on 37 instead, we're looking at Wolves, Bournemouth, Everton, Liverpool, Brighton City, Arsenal, Chelsea, with also Chelsea and Tottenham being moved to Game Week 36. Now, of course, we had some updates in terms of the Brighton versus Roma fixture, so I think that's the first thing that we want to get started with in terms of just discussing, because that, of course, has impacts on our understanding of Chelsea and Tottenham. For example, based on some other fixture gurus and even Ben Crellin, he does think that this Brighton fixture actually has less of an impact on that Wolves versus Bournemouth fixture than we previously thought. So actually, it seems like that Chelsea versus Tottenham fixture instead could be impacted otherwise. And I think that, of course, is a slight shift in terms of our understanding. But this is, if you'd like to run, for example, James's fixture scenarios, this is what it looks like. I mean, do you have any sort of other additional thoughts, JD, on this set of fixtures and these binary settings?
Yeah, first of all, I just like to point out that Discord has it in for me. Last week we saw that I could not
Yeah.
stream properly. I don't know whose fault it was, and I just cut out. Like Discord just stopped working. I had to relog in. So apologies to anyone
Hmm.
who's watching live. Just to go back to James' fixtures, and as Fran has already pointed out, these are probably a little bit in flux because James has already updated his fixture understandings based on what happened in Brighton in the Brighton versus Roma game. Roma won 4-0
Yeah.
for anyone that does not know, which almost certainly guarantees that Roma is going to progress in UEL. Although stranger things have happened. So one thing that I can see here is that Wolves and Bournemouth have their double game week moved to 37. I don't. Yeah, it was already in 37, so it's not part of Ben Crellin's uncertainty. I will just post the link to this in the description, and people can have a look for themselves because it's too tedious on live to just keep comparing all those fixtures.
Hmm.
Also, because reviews fixture settings are sort of different compared to how FPL.team have their fixtures put up. So it's a sort of meaningless exercise right now. From a planning or from a wildcard perspective, I can say that this is one of the settings that I have been using to run my solves. And we've been talking about running binary fixtures. So just to give you a preview, James's fixtures is one, Talha Nadeem's fixtures is second, and Ben Crellin's fixtures are third. So these are three fixture probabilities, binary fixture probabilities that I've been using to run solves. And also, apart from that, reviews default probabilities, which are not zeros and ones, they are continuous, more continuous in nature. So all four of these will help me narrow down maybe let's say the core of my team, and then I can maybe look into how my fringe players are going to stack up.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, the Brighton vs Roma result has changed these things. But
Yeah.
I think the crucial thing, as I said, is that Chelsea versus Tottenham fixture. That's the biggest impact as a result of this. I think there's basically consensus with all the gurus so far that that's the fixture that's most likely going to be, scoped out of like 35/36, which could of course change gaming 34, and
Yeah,
that's
as per James's understanding, and as I said, I'm not going to read out all the fixtures,
yeah.
but looks like there will only be two double game weeks, as in two fixtures that will be in game week 34. The rest of them have been pushed out to 36 and 37, which already impacts free hit 34 because the lesser the fixtures you have in 34, I don't know how you're going to take advantage of the fixtures that there are. And I know that fan is also a little bit worried about free hit 29 versus free hit 34. So we'll get to that
Yeah.
discussion, but I just wanted to point that out based on what I'm seeing here.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously that's like, we have talked about how there was, previously quite an expected lack of overlap, between 34 and
Hmm.
37. So once
Hmm.
again, of course,
Yeah.
margins are getting finer. Next one, of course, is going to be sort of Ben's slightly outdated settings once again. I think the significant change is you have also topped on, I think, the Everton versus Liverpool adjustment. We talked about that last week in the podcast, but
Yeah.
effectively, we have a vague reason to sort of believe that Everton versus Liverpool could be moved to gaming 37. Although I think the caution being attached to that is that maybe policing would be very tough around that fixture. So there could be an impact on that, and maybe it doesn't actually sort of culminate as we expect. But of course, the alternative is that you just have Fulham versus Liverpool there, I suppose. And I think, majorly speaking, you can just see the flip between Wolves versus Bournemouth and Wolves versus Arsenal. So that, of course, even under, for example, let's say James's most recent one, I think the main swap really is where those fixtures lie. So that's an interesting one. Like, do you think there's been an update there? Because I know James is looking at, I think, Wolves versus Bournemouth on Game Week 37. Um, whereas I think
Sorry, do
Ben,
you mean Ben?
no, I think James's most recent one actually had Wolves versus Bournemouth in Game Week 37.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I'm saying that James always had it at 37. I don't think
yeah,
that
yeah.
has changed because if
Oh
yeah,
no, that's a
so
good
yeah,
point. Yeah,
James,
so that
yeah,
is the big
yeah,
sort of switch around where, of course, I think Ben was sort of looking at Wolves versus Bournemouth 134.
yeah.
What do you think the impact of that is? So really, like, if you were, let's say, to swap those around, it is really just how Game Week 34 would sort of pan out with Arsenal, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read out Ben's latest tweet, which
Hmm.
has been put up since we
Yeah.
started streaming. So he says that since I last posted it, Brighton have been beaten 4-0 by Roma, which means Brighton versus Chelsea is very likely to move to game weeks 35-36 if Chelsea win against Leicester, which is perhaps the
Pretty
most
likely. Yeah.
predictable result. And I'm now less sure about where Arsenal Chelsea will move if the favourites win the FA Cup. That means Bournemouth still have a reasonable chance of doubling in 34.
Yeah.
And I had a look at what his previous projections were in terms of percentages and his adjustments, and it's essentially 49-51. So 49% Bournemouth double in 34 and 51 that Bournemouth double in 37.
Yeah.
So he's gone from being reasonably sure of the back of Brighton Roma to now being completely unsure, which is totally fine because it does seem that there are a lot more variables in play now.
Mm-hmm.
So the end result is, even though you have all fixtures binary, you need to perhaps, and this is something that I am planning on doing, and I don't know, this sounds very tedious, is to run both settings, which is take all the other fixtures in binary and then take Wolves Bournemouth in 34, run everything, and then take Wolves Bournemouth in 37 and run everything,
Yeah.
which just means that you will double the number of solves you are doing because you have that uncertainty, which is still better than having zero point 0.5 and zero point 0.5, because what that will do is that might introduce someone like Kilman into your wildcard because his EV will be artificially high in one of the weeks. And for example, let's say you're bench boosting in 37, which I think all of us are at this point
Yeah.
who still have our bench boosts. So it might happen that on 34, on a free hit, he will be part of the free hit because his EV is 1.5 games worth. And also he will be on the bench boost because his EV is again 1.5 games worth. But once that wave function sort of collapses and you have either the fixture in 34 or 37, I'm sure he will stop appearing in one of the solves.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a much better example that if FPL Spaceman or JC gave in the podcast which they did, the bonus podcast they did on FPL Optimized, which is he used the example of Senesi back when Senesi was still fit. So what the example he used was that if Senesi is let's say double gaming probabilities are split up into point 0.2, point 0.2, point 0.2, and point 0.2, the solver might suggest you to not buy him at all because it's not enough. 1.2 games of Senesi are not worth enough. But if it's, let's say, it resolves into one single game week, the solver might say, okay, buy him for this game week, play him for this game week, and then bench him for the other 3 game weeks, because that EV boost in one week is worth benching him for the other weeks. So these are the sort of things that you will come up come upon when you are running solves, which is why running with probabilities is a bad idea, especially when you are wildcarding like I am.
Mm-hmm.
So just to get a better feel of what players are appearing in your solves, I would definitely recommend going with a more robust and tedious approach.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think so. What I was doing, for example, in Gaming 26 Wildcard was also doing something similar, where it's like you have these scenarios, you know what can come up, and you just sort of plan to have a team that sort of tackles, 13 out of 15,
Mm.
most scenarios. And of course, you might realize that two of your players won't be as effective or as EV positive as you'd expect, obviously, without the information, with the imperfect information that you had. But
Mm.
it is still a worthwhile endeavor. And of course, if you get lucky, then you'll be even more happy. And you could potentially also sort of realize which players would give you a little bit more negative EV gain and or even positive EV gain. You can see which
Mm.
ones you might not be able to carry through because they're not robust enough as certain picks. And I think that's the sort of taking away from it. Another thing too is that when we're solving for free at 34, if you're using partial probabilities, it is genuinely awful in terms of assessing the value of free at
Yeah.
34, because if
Yeah.
you're using partial probabilities, it's going to suddenly make Game Week 34 look very, very easy to tackle. And suddenly
Mm.
all these players who will definitely not have fixtures when the time comes for Game Week 34, who you've been, assuming an additional, let's say 30% of the fixture for, that's worthless EV, and you're going to lose that against the field. So that's a thing to point out, particularly, before we jump into that discussion of when you're wildcarding and how you're planning ahead. The last thing, of course, is I think to look at, for example, Talha's update. So obviously Talha's username is posted here. Planet FPL James and Ben Crellin, of course, you can find them on Twitter as well, but they're relatively more known. So Talha underscore Nadeem underscore 90 is his Twitter username. The interesting thing here is that I've taken his scenarios for 34 and 37 as a result of this sort of Brighton aftermath. And I made sure to check his little discourse with Praz on Twitter. And the key takeaway from that is that these are still very much alive. So these are not
Hmm.
outdated per se. But of course, as you can see, he had already sort of anticipated Chelsea versus Tottenham to be, scoped into 34, 37, as opposed to being like a 35/36 fixture. And the only change really is that Brighton gets moved into that sort of bracket of fixtures, which I think, even Ben has sort of agreed to. And I think James has also moved to Brighton Chelsea at 35 or 36 as well. So
Yeah,
this seems very
that's right.
consistent with the landscape. But of course, you can see significant differences between 34 and 37. I suppose the difference really is just the how you value. I mean, like City, for example, won't change too much. Arsenal, in my opinion, either. Maybe, of course, the only impact once again is Wolves Arsenal and Wolves Bournemouth, right? Because I think in terms of like the
Yeah.
gulf in fixtures, those are the ones that are probably the most concerning for 37 that would change your EV and your bench boost as well. On 34 though, I mean, let's say fixture scenario 1 and fixture scenario 2, what do you actually think the substantial differences for, maybe from the perspective of someone looking at a 3 at 34?
It's so funny that I spoke about Kilman, and this is exactly what this
Yeah.
shows. For example, that on free hit 34, if let's say Wolves versus Bournemouth drops, I'm pretty sure Kilman is going to be one of those who will be suggested on free hit,
Mm-hmm.
even if he's maybe on the bench, because I suspect that we'll still probably end up with, let's say, someone like Dalot, one Arsenal defender, or maybe even two Arsenal defense for that matter, if they are doubling.
Yeah.
So in that case, he will definitely be on the bench. And if Wolves Arsenal comes into the picture, I suspect he will be nowhere close to free hit 34. And the interesting thing here is, and I spoke about this in Wildcard 28 thread on Discord, uh, where I've been pretty active because I'm trying to understand as much as I can in terms of future planning. So again, as a United fan, I don't need to be biased in any sense, but it just means that 34 is that much better. I can just buy them for that week
Yeah.
and never own them other than for that week, which sounds very exciting to me because I think it minimizes my heartache, and at the same time I do get to own them for a double game week.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, I think it's perhaps a decent strategy. And Crystal Palace as well. I think Crystal Palace, someone like Munoz, the right back, I don't see or foresee owning him for weeks other than game week 34. So this seems like the perfect double game week to own him. Even if it is against Newcastle, it's at home. So he's I know Crystal Palace are not a great defense, so their clean sheet prospects won't be that great. But he is fairly attacking, I think. So from that point of view, easy
But I
EV
mean,
is going to be
there is
pretty
a
good.
West Ham fixture though, to be fair. So
There is a West Ham
yeah.
fixture, fair enough. Yes. So the one clean sheet might be definitely like more like point 0.8 or point 0.9 clean sheets might be on the card. So that's pretty good to buy someone like Munoz. And other than that, I would say that perhaps impacts 37 more because, for example, if I go with Neto right now, not Neto, my bad. Neto, I will be going with Neto, but Leno. So the second goalkeeper is going to be very important because I've been thinking about bench boost 37, and I
Yeah.
think whichever goalkeeper I own right now will be my goalkeeper when whichever team doubles in 37. So if Leno ends up doubling in 34, I'm I will have to make a goalkeeper transfer in 37 or play a single game with goalkeeper, which is not the end of the world. But
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm going to be up against everyone that is going to wildcard in 35 and 36, and also I think 30 and 31 because they will still have more information than I do right now.
Yeah.
So for all of us, I think what's your goalkeeper combination by the way?
Mine right now is actually Neto Flecken, so pretty horrendous. Yeah.
Right now mine is the same by the way, and the problem is it's a perfect sort of transition, right? Because Neto's bad fixtures start and Flecken's fantastic run of fixtures also starts at the same time.
Yeah.
So
It is a
it
good
is
pair.
almost too good to be true. So I know that's why you went for it, right? Because it is too good to be true. Because for example, Flecken plays Burnley in 29,
Yeah. Is Flecken real?
and yeah, exactly. Is that EV real? Is of course a separate conversation, and I know Fran likes to joke about it, but it is. it is a consideration.
Yeah.
I think those are sort of the key points that I am looking at in terms of wildcard. And as we go on to the draft, I can talk through this in more detail, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's just jump into this first draft here. So this is very clearly a free at 29 draft. Interestingly, we still have, Morris around. Any sort of,
Yeah,
maybe just starting off there, I would have assumed he would be more within just a free at 34 line. Um,
it's funny that it's almost non-negotiable. It seems like Morris,
really? Okay,
because
yeah.
when I was running drafts back on, let's say, Tuesday or Wednesday, he was not that important or not that necessary in all the drafts in review. I was seeing a lot of solves without him, but as the days have progressed, I'm seeing less and less solves without Morris in the team, both for free hit 29 and free hit 34. So my only conjecture here is that his 90 minutes nailedness is helping, him being on the bench. So for example, if you look at risk assessment and you look at, let's say, Salah, and I've spoken about this as well. Sorry, I know we sort of are skipping around, but the
No,
one
it's
thing
totally
that we
fine.
need to remember about Salah is that if you are free hitting 29 and you want to get Salah this week, and I suppose you will bench him, right? Because you will have better players to play this week.
Yeah.
And you also don't know how many minutes Salah will play because he played 20 minutes today against Sparta Praha, but that doesn't mean anything. He could easily play just 60 or 70 in game week 27 or 28. So let's say you bench him in 28. So what's going to end up happening is you won't play him in 28. He still has to play United in 29. He still has to go away for the international break and play one friendly against New Zealand. And then he has to come back and then play for the first time in your team. I think that there's just too much uncertainty. And I am extremely uncomfortable with this sort of a gamble where a player is just coming back from injury. I know he's Salah, he's probably one of the fittest players we know, but that doesn't exclude him from his injury reoccurring, let's say, because fit Salah is a different thing. But because he's coming back from an injury, I don't know if we should necessarily hold him against the same standards. So I am a little skeptical about starting with Salah, but I think if you are free at 29, I don't see any other option.
I think you have to.
Yeah, because you
I
just
think
don't
he's
have
priority
enough
over
free
Haaland
transfers.
unless you as you
Yes,
said, there's that injury doubt, which obviously that
yes.
that could really destroy your team. It reminds me of people who, moved into Haaland that week, that fateful week where he
Oh,
was injured. So
oh,
I mean, it could end up that bad. But I
yes.
also think I'm hoping that it's unlikely, and he was able to go through 20 minutes. We'll see, of course. Jurgen should give us an update, and therefore you're hoping for like a steady slope of good Salah minutes going forwards, and good captaincies now that you're sort of assuming. I mean, this draft is interesting because I think a lot of people tend to think that the game week 30/31 wild card is the one where you can go Haaland and Salah. It seems like you've afforded it here, um, at the cost of obviously carrying, you know, Marcus Tavernier in your team, and then also Morris as well. So I guess my question would be like, what are the plans after these few game weeks? Have you looked into the transfers after this? Because it does seem like a pretty inflexible draft, if I'm being honest. Just because outside of the doubles, how effective is like a Tav, a Morris, etc.
So that's a fair point. One thing that we need to know first of all is that this is a draft that I got from the mixed probabilities.
Mm,
So I don't
I
know
see. Okay.
how
Yeah.
much do you want to read into that, because I just think that if once, as I said, once those fixtures resolve themselves, I guess the transfer strategy might differ. One thing which is common among all those drafts is that if you choose to free hit 29, Holland and Salah are in the draft.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So Saka is not in some of the drafts, which is interesting. So, for
Wow.
example, there is a draft where you have Morgan Gibbs White instead of Saka, and the strategy is, depending on how the doubles fall, you sell one of your other midfielders for Saka later on. So you essentially skip the blank game week and you skip Man City away. Those are the two game weeks you
Yeah.
essentially skip, but you don't know if you will be able to bring him back. See,
And you lose the
as
Saka value, right? Which is
oh,
what? Yeah.
100%. And I've been talking to a lot of people who have bought Saka like I did at 8.5, and he is the one player where I don't think I'm ready to lose that value,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't think I'm going to get it back. Even if, let's say, I invest early in six different players, I don't think I'm ever going to get that sort of value back, because I don't know if people have been noticing the lack of price rises this week, but it is pretty evident that FPL have a good handle on when people are playing their wildcards, obviously, because
Yeah.
they know when people are playing the
What a
wildcards.
masterclass from
And
me to wildcard. Beat 30 points down the field, but get maybe 4 or 5 price rises. No,
oh, you did
I'm
get
just
them, to
kidding.
be fair. I think the bad luck on your part is that they got injured, so they could not rise twice. Otherwise, you would definitely have capitalized on, let's say, Wang and Neto and players
Yeah,
like
no,
that.
it's fine. So I'm just joking.
Yeah. No, no, I know. But all to say that I'm so worried about injuries, and this has nothing to do with, or maybe, okay, this has something to do with what's been happening to wildcards 26 and 27. And I'm a little skeptical that in order to, let's say, be a little protected from that sort of outcome, I need to at least have two free transfers in Game Week 30. So if I don't free hit, that is. So this is with free hit, obviously, you will have one free transfer. That is not an option. And in that case, review asks you to roll in 30. Now, again,
Okay.
my problem with rolling in 30 is that there's so much happening before that you get to that. So there's only one FA Cup, a round of fixtures, and 1 to 2 international fixtures for most of your players. So I am very skeptical about how I'm going to be able to afford rolling. And also, one more thing to disclose is that I already sold Holland on Tuesday in order to catch the Morris price rise, which never happened,
Yeah,
which also means that
it
I'm
might come
sort of
tonight.
committed.
To be fair,
Yeah, I mean, there more and more
too little,
people are
too late.
wildcarding, so it's already too
Mm.
late now.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, it's fine. I am not that bothered. I guess I am bothered by the fact that I can no longer consider free hit 29 path. But also, I don't know. Maybe this is old school, but just the thought of having no chips of substantial impact for the last 8 weeks is sort of frightening.
Mm.
And before, I guess most of the other players are pretty standard in terms of why you would own them, I guess, because Gabriel and Zabani and Doughty appear in most of the drafts. Even if you are wildcarding, if you're not wildcarding, you're free hitting 29, 34, it doesn't matter. So I guess my question to you is, where do you stand on 29 versus 34 right now?
I'm leaning towards 29. And I suppose we could just make this. I mean, we could have this discussion now, but I think based on sort of the movement of some of the probabilities, like particularly, for example, less confidence around the Wolves versus Bournemouth game beyond 34. That was actually one of those scenarios where it would have just sort of absolutely locked in free at 29 for me if it was going to
Hmm.
happen in 34, and a lot of the fixture gurus would have agreed to that. But ultimately, I've been running sols where the fixture is Wolves versus Arsenal instead, and honestly, I don't think I've lost that much EV. And if anything, most of my solves still have a lot of positive value around free at 29, and on a total basis, like I still have more expected value even with inverted decay souls. The only thing though that I've noticed is different is that um, when I run, for example, inverted decay souls with 1.3 free transfer value, which is default, versus the 0 free transfer value, it seems like that difference is what sort of splits free at 29 versus 3 at 34 for me. Whereas when I run on defaults, free at 29 actually comes out quite clear. Now, I think, yes, of course, we want to be sort of objective to the strategy, in of itself. But given that my team also is in a bit of a precarious spot, I'm just thinking like how realistic is it that I get to hit that sort of objective ceiling? Um, so that's sort of concerning to me. I still think I spoke even to Surtalp today just to think about it. Um, he's also still in the camp where he'd still use like 1.5 free transfer value, just because he feels like it's not realistic, like 0 free transfer value, and being able to gain something from it in terms of looking at the souls and things like that. Because if you remember, you were actually running some souls for me on my behalf with 0 free transfer value, and there were crazy things, like for example getting Richarlison on a week where he wasn't scheduled to play football, right?
Yeah,
um
yeah, fair,
and
yeah.
and like the reality of that even is like it's interesting, I suppose. So yeah, I've become a little bit more lean towards free at 29, but I think it's part of that has is not really changed in terms of players being available or things like that, but rather just as a circumstance of my own injuries, because I have to take an additional hit this week, which I wasn't actually planning to do so previously. That
Yes.
has sort of made my team a little bit more catered towards going for a 3 to 34 because I don't need to really take that hit unless I'm guaranteeing myself that I can go through Gameweek 29 unscathed. And in reality, I have to take quite a few hits to get there, as well as a hit this week. And I don't really like that too much because when I've been looking and discussing with some other wildcard 26ers, they actually have some of the people who went for much more safer solves, like let's say we're 100% planning around the Luton versus Nottingham Forest situation. They have a lot more expected value than me just on 29 alone, after the hits are taken into account. So I think they have, let's say, an expected value of something like 42, something around that territory. I am really still within the 30s if I was to take hits for this week and also the next week. So not only would I suffer this week, I'd also suffer next week, even versus some of the people and my peers. And these are even people who are still considering between 3 at 29 and 34. Another thing that I've noticed too is I have another sort of 15 out of 15 manager, FPL Johnson as well, on Twitter, and I have slightly different bank value to him. So on our souls, he actually gets less value on free at 29 than I do. And part of that, of course, is that I have slightly more bank value. So,
Mm.
these kind of things have sort of changed my consideration of things. Is there, I haven't necessarily sussed out exactly why that additional bank value like spits out more transfers, but potentially, of course, it could just be getting the perfect players for, managing 34 and that 37 landscape. And maybe that's the difference. But yeah, my issue, of course, is these injuries have crippled me. It makes less sense to sort of go all in the short term, particularly if I don't know whenever I run, for example, binary fixture scenarios, I don't see that upside of free at 34 anymore. So, why take these short term hits if I don't really need to? And later on, of course, I'd rather take hits around a bench boost because it always feels like you've got that coverage, and you'll have those guarantees later on. And I won't need to, for example, completely gut my team in gaming 34. There's going to still be good single game weekers there. So I'm not too concerned, particularly with the size of that game week too. Like one thing that I've just looked at, for example, by just assessing, for example, Ben Crellin's fixture probabilities for 34 is from the previous graphic before the Brighton versus Roma game. I think he was predicting something like 4.7 double game week fixtures, right? Or
Mm.
4.2, 4.3, somewhere around there. And now, of
Mm.
course, it's literally dropped to sub 4. So, if anything, like just from a fixtures point of view, we're expecting less from Trier 34. Although I think he's also reduced the amount of chance that there's a blank fixture. So that also goes against that. But ultimately, though, I think we do think that Game Week 34 is a little bit less powerful. So,
Yeah.
if my team, for example, in the short term needs surgery, maybe I avoid that surgery, so I can actually just pursue a path that is pretty clean, has guaranteed EV and free at 29. But I think one question that people like to discuss is this concept of free risk, right? Between your free
Yep.
at 29 and between your 3 at 34, it's probably likely that the field will have 7 to 8 players that you have. Yes, of course, that's true. And I think it comes down to, do you want to take additional risks in 3 at 34 where, of course, you're probably going to have a starting 11 that's radically different to the rest of the field, but you might have picks that have competing EVs. So, for example, a single game weaker could line up very well with another double game weaker, but you could have complete free risk. Like, what do you think about that? And whether that changes your mind on free at 34? Because that's something I have been thinking about, right? I've lost a lot of effective value to the field.
Yeah.
It feels like, of course, going free at 29 is a little bit more of the meta path, if we want to put it that way. But then free at 34, you could technically have more free risk. I don't know if you've paid too much attention to it. Do you think it's overrated? Or does it just simply come down first to EV? And let's say if the EV is even, like, would you be much more interested in free at 34?
No, that is an excellent point. First of all, because I always seem to remember anecdotally that these things go wrong. Meaning that, for example, doubling up on Everton defense
Hmm.
in that game week and assuming that they double in 34 with competing EV to, let's say, Arsenal defense. Assuming that Arsenal get a single game week in that week, more often than not, anecdotally again, I don't have the data at hand, and interesting to see if I can figure out a way to get that data. But it always seems that the double game week risk never seems to pay off. Also, because of course you are betting on a lesser team, so the distribution of clean sheet probability is definitely wider compared to something like Arsenal, which is much more concentrated around, let's say, the mean value. So I definitely am skeptical about free hitting out of players that are highly owned
Mm.
and then getting into a team which has competing on, let's say, point 0.1, point 0.2 EV more, and then losing out massively against the field just because it's free risk, right? So for that reason, I have a backup plan, which is that, let's say there are very few doubles and the doubles don't need you to change your team massively. I would just free it in 38. That's that's the final thing that I would do. Yeah. Yeah. Because I don't foresee myself free hitting in any other week. And I have also run solves for, let's say, free hit 34, bench boost 37, and the EV is abysmal. It's I think it's around the order of minus 30, less than the other way around. So there is no way you can play the bench boost chip anywhere other than 37 as
Yeah.
of now.
No, I agree with that. I've looked into that
So
a while back too. But yeah,
yeah,
certainly I think
so
37 is just locked in, and it just comes down to how many good doubles there are. Like those hits will
yeah,
be substantially worth it for the bench boost. You'll never
for
have that
37,
opportunity. Yeah,
100%,
yeah,
because you will be supplementing your team instead of substituting, which will be the
yes,
case in 34, I think. And substitution is, I don't know. I just have a very bad feeling about transferring out good players for ordinary players just because they have very slightly better EV. And also because, let's say, for example, they have two shots at something rather than one shot. So
exactly.
I completely am on board with what you just said in terms of the risk. I am not one of those who is going to take free risk just because, unless the EV gains are substantial.
Interesting.
So
Okay, that's a
338
fair
is going to
point.
be my backup plan, and I don't know. Maybe it will pay off. Maybe it won't. If I don't free it in 34, I will definitely have lost value by not free hitting in 29, because I was looking at the gains you get, and the true gains you get from free hit 29. So let's say wildcard 28, free hit 29 do not materialize in 29. They materialize in 30, 31, 32, and 33, because the EV for your team in those 4 weeks is much better than your EV if you are free hitting in 34, because you
Interesting.
can just front load your team with Salah and Holland,
Hmm.
which means that you are left to transfer out. Let's say, for example, Watkins, not Watkins. This draft doesn't have Watkins, but let's say, for example, if you have money in the bank, you can go from Solanke to Isaac or something like that, because those are, or Morris to Isaac actually. Morris to Isaac was the move. I just remembered. For next game week 31 or game week 30, the first move recommended is Morris to Isaac. So Morris is not part of my team for long. All I'm saying is these are the sort of things that you have to consider, and I don't envy anyone who is wildcarding with me, because I think we are in the same camp as 26 and maybe not 26. 26 I think was much more stressful because of the uncertainty in FA Cup fixtures, but I think 27 and 28 is pretty much the same in terms of that. I guess
I think
the
so.
only
Yeah,
difference is,
the
the
Senesi injury.
City
Yeah,
City game versus
true. Yeah.
United. Yeah.
Okay, so the next draft is going to be the free hit 34 draft. Now, of course, this just basically carries your prime players like, Reguilon, for example.
Mm.
Interestingly, only, I mean, you've got basically double Brentford once again. Was there any sort of consideration towards like going Areola just to sort of hedge defense, or was this just sort of like a default solve?
Yes, so Ariola was my first preference,
Mm-hmm.
and I was running Sols by just choosing him in the beginning and just
Hmm.
running
Yeah,
Sols post gaming 28. So just fixing a wild card and running Sols post 28.
yeah,
What I noticed was that there aren't many weeks where Ariola has better EV than Flecken. And as I already
interesting.
said, Flecken has an insane run compared to most goalkeepers. And we know that his EV is a bit fugazi. So I don't know how much of that is going to materialize,
Yeah,
but double Brentford does actually fill me with dread. I'm not going to lie, it
it
is
does. Same
absolutely
with
a
me.
dreadful prospect. So I don't know if I'm going to go ahead with that. As you already you pointed out, I think Ariola also saves you money, and
Exactly.
he's the highest own goalkeeper, right? So if you just want to go that route, I guess you can.
Yeah,
But I think the gains with Flecken are much more, and the fact that neither of them double again for the rest of the season just makes me think Flecken is much better for the run-in.
Yeah,
And other than that, I think Udogi is the big change. Now, I have to disclose that I have barred all Spurs defense other than Van der Ven and Udogi, just
fair.
because,
Anything against
yeah.
Romero or
Oh, just the yellow card and red cards.
yeah,
I just can't. And anyone who's played UCL Fantasy might remember Romero fondly because of ball recoveries. You don't have that in FPL, so we don't have the luxury of those things. So unfortunately, no Romero, and I think Romero is more expensive as well. So
he is quite
or he
expensive. Yeah,
just became more expensive. So I
yeah.
bought him at the same price, but he just became more expensive. I don't know if he's going to double rise, but I don't think so. So other than that, I think Madison is the one where I feel very comfortable because we
Absolutely.
know
Yeah.
that Spurs are doubling later on, and you also have Madison in your team. I suppose you also
No,
went
I
with the
don't
same
actually
logic
have
that.
Madison in my team. I've
Oh,
actually
you
got
don't? Oh,
Palmer in
I'm
my
sorry.
team. Interestingly, yeah.
Oh, okay. My bad. I don't know
No,
why I
that's all
thought
right.
you had Madison. Yeah. So
Um,
anyway, so Madison just makes me think that okay, you are covered in 29, and you are covered for any double game weeks that will arise later on.
yeah, you have a great Gaming 30 fixture as well, which is obviously
Yeah,
why it's nice to actually own these Spurs picks because you can keep them for a while and not feel so
exactly,
bad compared to like your Saka and
exactly.
Palmer's. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm
and
curious
let's
actually
say
what happens to this Bowen position? So and what happens with transfers around Salah and Palmer,
yeah,
just the two
yeah.
of them, right? Because game week 30, I think arguably Palmer has the better fixture. But then Salah, of course, everyone wants him around game week 30. Is it just a case of delaying Salah?
No. So with two free transfers in Game Week 30, because you roll in 29 with this team, which means that you don't have Ivan Toney against Burnley, which could be
But don't you
devastating.
don't you oh yeah, okay, that's a good point actually. So you just go straight
Yeah,
to the two of them. Yeah. Makes sense.
yeah, exactly. So I am sort of, I would say, desperate to have two free transfers in 30 because I just think
Hmm.
that with
Okay.
so much, so many things happening before Game Week 30, I just need that flexibility of two free transfers, which
Right.
means that I have to forego of Tony's
Tony. Yeah. That's
pretty high
pretty big.
EV
Pretty
in
big.
that week,
Yeah.
which is a sacrifice that I just have to firm it. I
Hmm.
don't have an option there. And once I get through Gaming 29,
But you get Gibbs
Gaming
White though,
30,
so how awesome is that?
oh my God, I'm so. Okay, I'm just going to mention it right now that I loathe that pick. And I don't know why I'm going with him. If I do end up with him, I guess the only reason is for money reasons. Like
Yeah.
if I had because I checked your team value by the way, because you told me to run solve, so I
Hmm.
had loaded your team
Yeah.
into review. You have 1.1 million more sell value than me.
Right. Yeah. But
So
part of
it's
that is
not
also
even
because
team
I
value.
wildcarded again earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's sell value, right? Which
Hmm.
player have you gained zero point 0.2 on? I don't think you have a single player except Son, and I got Son at the same
Yeah.
time, so
I think you're
you
right
didn't get any
actually.
additional price
Yeah,
rises.
maybe no one
Yeah,
actually. I couldn't even get the Hoyland
exactly.
price rise. How shocking is that? Because he
Mm,
got injured before the deadline.
injured,
It's just too
exactly.
funny.
So
Yeah.
your wildcard 26 has nothing to do with it. It's your wildcard 8, which is
Hmm.
primarily responsible.
Yeah.
So I was looking at that and I thought, oh, this just means that I'm going to be not going to be able to afford whatever draft I really need.
Hmm.
And so that means that I have to
How much
compromise
does
with
this
someone
have like
like
in the
Gibbs
bank, like
White.
just theoretically right now?
So I'll tell you the moves and perhaps you can gauge from that.
Yeah.
So the moves in Game Week 30 are Bowen to Salah
Hmm.
and Gibbs White to Palmer.
Okay, so you actually do have quite a bit of money in the bank. This is what I was
Yeah,
thinking about too, because yeah,
yeah,
I asked about Salah and Palmer because I thought because
yeah.
I tend to run. I mean, it's actually quite similar to my team, right? Because I've got Palmer, and I also need to think about going for Salah. I mean, one thing that I've noticed too is ultimately Salah's best fixture is 31, right? Um,
Yes.
so I think some people who are so fussed about Salah at 30 also just need to accept that you can always go for him at 31. Now, of course, if you watch Brighton tonight, I mean, maybe you actually want Salah on 30, like for sure. But you can always take a hit for Salah, in my opinion, give me 30 if he's that important to you. And of course, I think it always feels good to take a hit for a captaincy because it feels like, you're getting that EV back immediately. Even though
Yeah.
that's just, a very grassy sort of point of view. But the reality is Salah is a very clear captaincy on 30 as well. So that's nice. Even if let's say you choose to go Tony, I think at the end of the day, if this team is forced to take hits for Salah um, and Palmer, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Because ultimately you just don't really want to be carrying a lot of these players within your squad going forwards. The only thing I'd say is also interesting is I guess just one Arsenal player within this draft. Is that hard to
E-
reconcile with as well?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I was saying when I said that I have seen solves where Saka doesn't appear,
Mm,
and
yeah, and
so
this is
I've seen
scary. Yeah.
Creamy in the chat, and he's also wildcarding in 28. He has the exact same team. I think he has point 0.2 sell value more than my team.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, what that means is we've been talking about what drafts we are most comfortable with, and I've reached the same conclusion that I just can't go without Saka. I know that 29 and 30 are not the best uh,
For him.
couple of
Yeah.
game weeks for him, but it doesn't matter. I have so much value invested in him that I would rather, let's say, instead of in this draft. So for listeners, I'm sorry I forgot to read out the other team, but I'm just going to do that for this one
Yeah.
because this is what I'm likely to go with. So in goalkeepers, I have Flecken and Neto. Defense is Zabani, Doughty, Udogi, Gabriel, Regulon. Midfield is Son, Madison, Barkley, Gibbs White, Bowen, and forwards are Solanke, Holland, and Watkins. Now, one thing, of course, you must have noticed already, Fran, that I already have Holland in this, which means that
Yeah.
I have one less player in 29 automatically,
Mm-hmm.
which was going to be the case anyway, right? Because if, let's say, and this is strange, it means that even if I do buy back Holland, which is incurring a loss of zero point 0.3 because I sold him for 14.2, I'll have to buy him back for 14.5.
Yeah.
It's still a pretty reasonable draft. So
Fair.
I think the Salah move, as you said, could be postponed if, let's say, my team has other injuries that I need to tend to. But Palmer, I think, is almost nailed
You
for
have
that
to, I mean, it's Burnley at
game.
home.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah, yeah,
incredible. Yeah.
100%. I would rather not sell him, to be honest, because
Mm.
so for example, I think you bought him at 5 million, right? If I'm not wrong,
I did sell him on my
Palmer,
wild
and then
card
you
though.
sold him.
Yeah.
You sold him, and then you bought him back. But what I
Yeah.
meant to say there was you invested in him much earlier than I did. So I bought him at
That's
5.3
true. Yeah.
and he is now 5.7. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting 5.5 out of him. So I'm not feeling that bad about it because
No, I
it's
don't think
just
that's
zero point
fine.
0.2
Yeah.
million. Exactly. But see, I've already lost value in Holland, which is why I think people can understand why I'm hesitating to lose the value in Saka because I'm already bleeding value here and there in all sorts of
Yeah.
positions in the team. So that just makes me a little more hesitant to lose all the value in that one player because if I remember correctly, I have two players where I have built up the most value, which is Gabriel and Saka.
Yeah.
So I'm just a little hesitant, and I think it's going to stay that way. I don't think I can go without Saka, but just something for people to consider for people that have lower team value.
Mm-hmm.
Because another topic that was being discussed in the Wildcard 28 thread on Discord was that what if you invested in Saka late? So let's say you bought him for 9 and he's now 9.2,
Right.
and those people are selling Saka, which makes sense because you can then easily buy him back for 31.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, I just thought I should present this draft intentionally because this is perhaps a more wider application
Yeah.
compared to what I am going with.
Mm-hmm. Can we
Yeah.
discuss just quickly some of the picks that you'd see, for example, within these drafts that you might not see now? So I think generally speaking, when I'm thinking about all the transfers that we're going to make towards the end of the season, like some of the players that I think definitely we've already discussed, but like Isaac, for example, Darwin as well. Um, I think one thing that I want to mention too is that I tend to see a lot of Robertson in review. He's an option that I've automatically excluded. Absolutely ridiculous option. I'd rather go Virgil. Um,
Yep.
and I mean, look, even Kelleher, I don't know if you really, really want to cheese something like, but it's so, I think it's such a fragile draft. And also, Allison seems to be closer to coming back
Yeah.
than we previously thought, even though we actually thought
Yeah.
he'd be coming back much later. So that's happening too. Um, One other question I had to ask as well is, let's say you're not wildcarding. Um, just the thought about, let's say, Zabarni, right? Let's say if you transferred in Senesi last week for a hit, which a lot of managers actually did,
Mm.
in anticipation, of course, getting back some of the value within the Bournemouth fixture. Like, what do you think about Senesi to Zabarni just as a straight transfer? Do you think it's dependent on the free hit situation once again? Because I think for me, what I've sort of devised from it is, I think it depends on, of course, whether you have a genuinely good back three for this week. Like, for example, I own Gabriel and Saliba and Doughty. So actually, none of those players are less than 4 EV behind someone like Zabarni, Whereas I think a lot of people are considering just going straight from Senesi to Zabarni as a move, because of course it's a lot of upside, right? Because outside of those Arsenal picks, outside of those Luton picks, there's no other team that can give you that much value in terms of EV terms than someone like Zabarni would, or even Kirkes, right, or Smith.
Mm, mm.
So I don't know if you thought about it, but for the just regular managers who are sort of not playing their wild card, like what do you think about that genuine transfer? And yeah, any thoughts about that?
Okay, so first of all, I've banned Smith as well. He's one of the players in my exclusion list. My
Interesting.
exclusion list has like 16 or 17 players now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it's natural for review to suggest one line of thinking,
Yeah, exactly.
and it's sometimes very stubborn in that
Exactly.
line of
It's like
thinking.
predicated on a player coming to your
Yes.
team,
So,
right?
for
Because yeah.
example, review is obsessed with double Chelsea defense
Okay.
later on. Later on.
And right now we
So,
actually think that there's some injuries, right? But I guess Gusto is the
exactly.
player
Yeah,
once again with
Gusto is the
James
one
as an asterisk, but
100%.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. 100% I'm behind that pick, and I would be going for him later in the season. And I think in the previous draft that you were showing, Gusto is in that team.
Yep.
So if that is the case, I don't want any other player because I don't know who is going to be fit and what's going to happen.
Yep.
So I had to systematically ban them. So for example, I started with Dizazi, then it started throwing out Colville. I had to ban Colville. Then it started throwing out Thiago Silva. Then I had to ban Thiago Silva. So I
Fair.
just had to like go banning
And
every
have you
single
thought
player.
about
Anyway,
Petrovic though? Did you exclude him as well,
yes,
or
Petrovic
yeah?
is my first exclusion in that
Mm.
list
But is that
because I
because
have
you
no
just don't
idea.
want to deal with the
Yes,
uncertainty? Okay, fine.
that is exactly right.
Right. As opposed to
He
like
has
you
tremendous
might be
CP.
leaning towards Petrovic keeping a spot, but you want to take that chance as
Yeah,
well. Okay,
yeah,
fine.
exactly, exactly. It's not exactly like, but it is almost like the Jason Steele, Robert Sanchez situation from last season,
Yeah.
where I don't want any part of that.
Yeah, you could, for
And
example, get it right in terms of going for steal, but of
yes,
course it could. There
just
is
like
just
you did,
it is going to be a
where
hit later down
you
the
went
line.
with
Yeah,
Sanchez,
yeah,
and as soon as you saw Sanchez was dropped, you went to steal, you got an assist, you got a penalty save, and it
yeah,
turned out to be a brilliant move in hindsight.
yeah.
And
Admittedly,
also, it
I
was
do like Petrovic once again. It
yeah,
does remind me of that
exactly,
situation. I agree with you.
yeah,
But Sanchez, we've watched him as well play football. So has Pochettino. But
yeah,
Petrovic has looked very good. Mostly comfortable in a lot of situations where Sanchez hasn't. And
yep, yep.
yeah, I'm sure you watched Sanchez
Sorry,
versus United as
coming
well.
back to your original question
Yeah,
about Bournemouth defense. So, unless you don't own Doughty, I would go for Doughty just because you get all those games out of him.
right.
And another thing to point out is if you go for a defense similar to what you can see on the screen right now, the Gameweek 30 defense is pretty bad. And I've been
Yeah,
trying
I've noticed
to
that as
wrap
well.
my head around how I can circumvent that.
Hmm.
It's very difficult to circumvent that because and okay, so okay, maybe I'm being a little partial or a little biased because I'm assuming that Regulon has a bad fixture and it's United at home, which is not the end of the world, so I can still definitely play him.
I
But
think
am I
Udogie carries
expecting
this
a clean
defense
sheet?
too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So
and
eh,
Zabarni as well, who has a home fixture. Yeah,
Zabarni,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think I would end up with playing Zabarni, Udogi, and Regulon.
fair.
So I go from 3 Luton in Game Week 28 and 29 to 0 Luton playing for my team in Game Week 30,
Yeah.
which was always the plan. But on paper, it seems like how do I
No, I
get
agree with what
around
you're saying. Like from an
the bad
XGC
fixtures?
point of view, it looks like it's a poor defense, but then actually, I
Yeah,
think in terms of like how it covers those fixtures where Arsenal and Liverpool, like City play, for example, like it
yeah,
actually is quite good. And as you said as well, like a Chelsea defender could easily slot in there too, just because they have a good fixture as well, like Game Week 30. So, yeah, I think those are definitely some considerations that people have to make. And then of course on the free hit sort of 29 variant, you'd be looking at potentially a Virgil if you can afford it, right, with additional money in the bank. Because
yes.
I've run some souls myself, and because I probably can afford Virgil within my team, I have Virgil. But I'm sure obviously with tighter budgets, it's a little bit harder to sort of allow for.
No, 100%. I have also seen Virgil appear in some of
Yeah.
the solves. I guess one of the reasons it doesn't persist or he is not persisting in perhaps multiple drafts
Hmm.
is the immediate sort of game weeks. Like
Yeah.
28 is bad, and that's why I think Gusto is preferred over someone like him. Even though Gusto is on the bench in that draft where you free hit in 29, so maybe it doesn't matter if you have Gusto or Van Dijk. if you have that sort of budget where you can go for a Van Dijk over Gusto, that is definitely a consideration,
Yeah.
because there are double game weeks to come for Liverpool, and he is one player who is going to play every single week. So might as well go for him. And
Yeah. Well, one thing I also want to ask too is like, so a lot of people have been thinking about Fulham, right? Because for a lot of the
yeah,
managers who are sort of trying to squeeze budget, make those sort of ridiculous Haaland Salah teams that still include Watkins, still include Saka, still include Son. A lot of the sort of make weights there would be like players like Muniz, or even for example, like even a Fulham defender potentially who's just a bit
mm.
cheaper than some of your regular defenders. Like, have you thought about adding Fulham to your drafts, or your drafts rather? Um, or has there been no consideration about that?
Yeah. So I previously mentioned Leno, right? He is
Yeah, yeah, Leno
strongly
is it? He's
in
yeah,
my
strong
in
Game
my
Week
thoughts
27 keeper.
because
Yeah,
exactly, and we talked about doubling up on Brentford defense. It also means that I don't do that, which is
true.
giving me
Yeah,
some sort of comfort, knowing that I am not doubling up on Brentford defense. But also, I've seen Leno terrorize some ridiculous clean sheets this
like
season.
last week even. Yeah.
So yeah, exactly, absolutely. So I'm not sure that if that sort of outcome is influencing my thought process.
Hmm.
But I think his EV is decent as well if you
It
look
is
at it
decent. It always has been, I
objectively.
think. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly. And he's one of the best shot stoppers in the league. There is no doubt about that. So he does rack up a lot of saves. And if Fulham don't score a lot of goals, it does automatically mean that he is in consideration for bonus points. So all those things are a reality. But also, I just want to make sure that the rotation works out at least a little bit. I just don't want to run into, let's say, a game week. I haven't checked every single game week. So there could be a possibility of, let's say, Bournemouth playing someone bad, someone difficult away from home, and Leno having a medium or difficult fixture at home, let's say. Even that sort of scenario is just, I just want to avoid that, because there is going to be a lot of, as you pointed out earlier in the pod, a lot of inflexibility around certain spots. And I think goalkeeping is one of them. So once I finalize my two goalkeepers, I ideally do not want to spend free transfers on that spot again.
fair. Yeah,
Yeah.
until
So
maybe 37, I suppose.
yes,
Yeah.
and speaking of Fulham defense, again, if you're free hitting in 29, one of the defenders which is appearing in many of my solves is Castagne. That could easily be Robinson, by the way, because I still feel like Robinson is, let's say, 100% nailed if Castagne is 99% nailed.
Yep.
So that is the sort of margin we are looking at. So my preferences, I think I would say Leno. If not Leno, then Robinson. But there are a lot of considerations for defensive assets in terms of the rotation. So I don't know how Robinson fits into that. Apart from that, I just don't see owning anyone for the rest of the season. Do you have any strong thoughts about someone like Muniz? Because he does seem to have the minutes locked in
Right now, yeah, because of course, like Jimenez
right
is
now.
still not that close. But I think
Yeah.
the interesting thing about Muniz, of course, is like he's one of those examples of a player where, you have no certainty about his minutes. He is overperforming right now. Like, just to be clear,
Hmm.
I think he scored 5 goals from something like 3 point something xG. He averages something like 0.36 xG per game, which is actually very low, right? Someone like Tony as well this season, you'd be shocked to find out he's also averaging sub 0.5 xG per 90. So yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, you're looking at those types of players, and of course, even though he's in a serious run of form, like you have to also be super confident about how good Muniz is, or how good, for example, moving into a potential 3-5-2 would be for your team. Because the
Hmm.
reality is, we're all still building for a bench boost 37. Um, and of course, if for example Muniz sort of puts you into a spot of bother, let's say he stops scoring at the ridiculous pace that he is, which is pretty probable. What happens around that? It's convenient to look at him, I think, as a make weight really for getting, let's say, someone like Salah right into your team and giving 30, with no issues. But I think people also want to think about when you lock into a 3-5-2, for example. Let's say you go for Semenyo this week, someone like that. How does that change your team going forwards? Because I think the reality is we do want still rotating players, and not to mention that too. But I think outside of, let's say, Foden, a lot of the priority players who are at that sort of price point between like 7 to 9 million, that you like to have a strong core of them within your team, and Saka, for example, is included. Like, the players that we're actually looking at are more so players like Isaac and more so players like Darwin, as opposed to just a 4.5 forward that you can go for to lock in, so that you can like keep, for example, Foden back in your team 'Cause yes, of course, you can go for something like, I don't know, Son, Madison, Salah, Palmer, Foden.
Mm.
That's an extremely strong team. I haven't even included Saka, for example. And maybe that's worth it, right? That could be it. But I think it
Yeah.
comes down as well, like what your preferences are. Because, of course, if you're targeting Liverpool, you've got Darwin. For City, of course, it's Foden. If you're targeting certain other players, of course, it does change, what your team structure would be. So I think that's something that people need to sort of look into as well when they consider, for example, making their draft a little bit more inflexible if you're trying to squeeze in someone like Muniz. But yeah, I think one thing that I've noticed, of course, is if you run his minutes like highly, like let's say he's a consistent sort of 81-minute player with less aggressive decay. Of course, he's a ridiculous pick. Of course, he's a ridiculous pick. And, you could make the argument once again that he might be one of those players who, because he's coming so late into the season and he's one of the few players we probably don't have much data over for the
Mm.
context of this year. I mean, he could be a steal, but I think with Fulham as well, I mean, how confident can you really be about that team? It's not like their underlying stats are great from an attacking point of view. So that for me is just the overall concern.
And also, I
But yeah,
think the strikers he's competing with all have penalties as well, which
yeah.
is our
Do you
primary
think he
concern.
could be on penalties?
I was thinking that, and
Yeah.
if Willian is not going to be on the pitch, perhaps, but also Andres Pereira is on the pitch, so and Harry Wilson is on the pitch as well. So I don't know if he will take a penalty. I
Mm-hmm.
suspect he is lower on the picking order.
Yeah, I don't think
But
he's
other than that,
taken a
I think
single penalty in his career, which of course,
yes,
as you
yes.
said, like takes away into his value as a player. So that's concerning,
Hmm.
and even though we haven't actually seen Andreas take penalties, that's something to think about too. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was. Do you want to go to the questions? Okay, so let's just cover captaincy because it's going to be a very short discussion. So everyone is captaining Solanke. If you don't own Solanke, I recommend you get Solanke.
yeah,
And the other two options, and I'm just going to mention them for the sake of, I don't know why, but
go
just
for it, go for
because,
it.
which is Zabani is second on AV and Morris is third. And now I'm eliminating a whole host of Bournemouth players in between Solanke and Zabarni because I'm not convinced about their minutes.
What about Neto though?
So, oh, Neto, I forgot. My bad.
Mm-hmm.
Neto is second. You're
Yeah.
right. Neto is second. Zabani is third. I
Mm-hmm.
forgot about Neto. I think I excluded him because mm, I, I don't think
Is it because you're
anyone is
spoiling which free
captaining a
hit you're going
goalkeeper.
for?
No, no, no,
Uh,
no. I don't think goalkeeper anyone is captaining a goalkeeper. That's the only
no,
reason why.
not when
Yeah,
there's a striker who's just as good.
exactly. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, let me caveat by saying that.
no, it's a
Oh,
good point.
also one more thing before we move on to the questions. I thought about this. Is it realistic to start reducing Saka's minutes in all the easy games? Because I've been thinking about this all
Interesting.
season
Okay.
on
Yeah.
review, and okay, forget about the fact that he was sick
Do you
in
think
this
this
particular
is
game
this
against
because
Sheffield
of
United.
sort of Champions League motivated this argument?
Yes,
Okay.
of course. So let's say they lose against Porto. I will obviously not advocate for that.
Right.
But let's say they progress in the Champions League,
Mm-hmm.
and we've seen this from Gameweek 1, by the way. This is not something that we've seen now.
Yeah.
It's because he certainly has some sort of niggles in and around his ankles and stuff like that, which
Yeah.
is sort of maybe troubling him a little bit. So from that perspective, I just feel like whenever they do have a chance, they will take him off, which just makes me feel like for all the games where Arsenal are favorites, I should start reducing his minutes to, let's say, 79 or something like that. Just to
Interesting.
see what the impact is.
Right.
And this is me not saying that I'm looking for an excuse to move Saka on, because far from that. But I just feel like all the evidence that we've seen, because if you remember, even in the group chat that we are in on Twitter,
Yeah.
everyone was so sure that he was getting subbed at halftime. Now, I know that we took an incorrect route to get to the correct outcome or the correct conclusion. But even if, let's say, he was not ill, he was definitely going to be subbed in and around the 60-minute mark. There was no way he was going to play for 90 minutes. So I just thought that this is something that maybe we need to consider while adjusting his minutes.
Do we think this applies to Foden as well?
That's why
Yeah.
I thought of that, because the first player that came to my mind was Foden, and then I went to Saka from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But have we seen that evidence for
I
Foden?
think it's
Is
so
my
tough
question.
because like sometimes when we see these substitutions, it's like it really is because the outcome has been secured. as
Yes.
opposed to like, oh, we need to just rest Saka because it's an easy game, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
like, I
No,
always
no.
think,
I meant from
yeah,
that perspective.
no, I
So I'm
I agree. I
assuming.
agree you're coming from that
Yeah.
perspective, but I
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
think like,
Yeah.
because we've already achieved the outcome, it's like, well, what's the point of looking at the sort of expectation, if that makes sense, like, and
Yeah.
adjusting our expectations, because it's very likely he would have overperformed already. Like for example, like at halftime, he had already bagged 2 assists. He had already
Yeah.
outscored, I think, well, maybe he probably had leveled his expected value, for the week within 45 minutes, and of course from that point of view, it's like, I think you know what actually sucks the most is for the people who are playing for these differential captaincies. Um, like I think it hurts the most in terms of their MD, right? The Mins MD. But yeah, when it comes down to actually like thinking about how I would adjust for it, I tend not to do so. This happens to even some players like Trippier and even like Anthony Gordon as well, because they're so important for their teams. They do get subbed off, of course, if there's ever like a good situation, if you're winning like 5-0, 4-0, to take these players off. But I always tend to think, because you've achieved the outcome, like I don't mind taking the hit on the MD, but I'm definitely not going to adjust their expectations going forward. So that's just me. I know some other managers feel differently, and they think, like for example, I know speaking to Jack, for example, he tends to like to adjust down. But I tend to think it's very hard, because I think, yeah, it is a case of sort of outcome being achieved, therefore
Yeah.
why
I
adjust
see what you're
expectations.
coming,
So
where you're coming
um,
from. That
yeah,
that until the uncertainty resolves itself,
yeah,
why do you want to tamper with let's say expectation? And funnily enough, and I swear I'm looking at this for the first time, Saka's minutes start off with 83 and they immediately go into 78 on review and they stay there, which
hmm,
means that review is perhaps
confident.
thinking the same thing that I am.
Yeah,
Which it is sort of assuring, but at the same time, we do have xMins and Mins EV separate for this exact reason that if you think differently, you are more than welcome to bet against the review expectation of minutes.
mm. No, I think that's a fair point. I
Yeah.
guess I mean the argument would also come down to like, are you willing to consider, let's say, going for Odegaard over Asaka potentially, right? Um, is that something that would come to
Ooh.
your mind?
What's the price difference? Is it over 1 million now?
I think the price difference is now 0.7 million if you're willing to sell Saka, right? So quite a lot.
So, for example, between your, let's say you created a wildcard 28 draft,
Yeah.
and if it's something similar to this, I suspect that one of the transfers later down the line could be you. For you, it could be Saka. For me, it could be Odegaard, for example.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, yeah. Because I completely agree with you. Again, the penalties are muddying the situation a little bit because Odegaard does still have, I think,
Yeah, do you
around
think
point
that's
3
been
or point
adjusted?
four.
Because obviously Saka took the last two penalties, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
yes,
And of course
yes.
that's sort of been building on the previous penalties as well. So like, I wonder if those percentages that we
I think
might have previously referenced
those
have
should
changed.
move or
I
should
would
have
have
moved
thought so,
actually. Yes,
as
I agree
well.
with you
Yeah.
because the last penalty that he took actually subverted my expectations at least because I was fully expecting him to give it to Odegaard.
Okay, yeah. And we've seen a lot of
With
Odegaard grabbing the ball, but actually Saka saying, "No, I want to take
yes,
this penalty,"
yes,
which
yes,
is positive, of course, when we own Saka and you know, have good expectations for him. So I think
yeah,
that's it in terms of discussion topics that we wanted to raise for the episode. But of course, we've got some questions that we can easily go through
yeah.
right now. So let's do it. Starting from the top, though, we've got Charlie saying, "Keep up the work, you too." Thank you so much, Charlie, as well for watching the content. Gautam as well, shouting out your UCL fantasy model. So for anyone who
Oh
doesn't really
wow,
know
okay,
what's
nice.
going on, Gautam is now fourth in India and no 203 in the world. So just showing, of course, the strength of playing with analytics.
Yeah,
You know, JD, for example, here has a
well done, well done.
fantastic UCL fantasy model. There is a Patreon for it as well. Puts a lot of great effort into it, and it even has xMins as well, if you believe that. FPL
Yeah,
Chai, nice to see you. Refical says, hello everyone, hello to you as well. Hi Trini, who of course is on WILDCARD28.
yeah.
Eddie Casey, sorry, has the first actual question here. He says he's got Estupiñán, Walker, Senesi. He's not a fan of one free transfer. Um, one
I
point.
think
He's
it's
got
like
1.5
he's
in the
not a
back.
fan
Oh,
of them,
okay.
and
He's
he
not
has
a fan
one
of
free
having this
transfer.
back line. Sorry, of
Yeah,
course. Which of course,
yeah.
because I think one thing that's nice is that Estupiñán was rested, so hopefully, of course, he's ready for the weekend to start. Obviously, you know, fingers crossed about it. They were also battered, right? So tentatively, what I would say is because Brighton were battered, then it's very likely that Subban's going to start over the weekend because
But they were battered against Fulham, and he did start that game.
that's true.
So it's very difficult
So you know
for
what?
me to
I
pick.
mean, I think
Yeah,
yeah, I wouldn't be confident on Esteban starting, but I think it's
yeah,
not the worst thing in the world. I think the simple reality is though that you've got
yeah. There is.
Zabarny right here waiting for you,
Yeah,
and if
yeah.
you're uncertain about Walker, who actually has a horrific fixture, I'd probably transfer out Esteban still and hopefully try to bench Walker within your team because going forwards, I don't think you really want to be keeping Brighton players. I'd rather keep Walker. I don't know what your thoughts are right now. Maybe we should
Yeah, yeah,
touch up on Walker.
100%. Out
Yeah,
of those three, Walker is the best
transfer out,
FPL
or you
asset
just go
by
out of
far.
Senesi as well, right? Because obviously, if the
No, no,
injury
I think
news,
you meant the other way around. I was saying
yeah,
that Walker you should keep because the other
no,
two
I
are
agree.
so much
Walker should
worse.
be kept, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
but I
yeah,
think
yeah,
either you
yeah.
sell Estupiñán or Senesi, right? But very unlikely that you want to
Tennessee
keep.
is, yeah,
Yeah, very unlikely you
Tennessee is
actually want to
just
keep
like,
Senesi, so I'd probably sell Senesi
no.
actually
Yeah,
first.
exactly. Yeah,
And
same.
Estupiñán's not a bad bench option. So
Yeah,
to Mez and John Doe, obviously, hello to you too. VC obviously giving us an update on Salah, which I
yeah,
think it's just positive news really for Salah, right? And particularly for people who are wildcarding, gives you more confidence around Salah as a pick.
yeah,
Otherwise, he's got Tony to Solanke and go for free at 29, or Holland to Solanke and take his to field 9 players and give me 29 with a -8. Look, personally, I'm in a similar camp. I've gone for, I am planning for a free at 29. I can't confirm 100% that I'm going to be on it, but I'll be looking more into, for example, the fixtures. But, generally speaking, Game Week 34 seems to be worse and worse. And this sort of latest update from all our fixture gurus seems to suggest that it's a pretty weak game week. And
yeah,
I think if you need to, fill yourself with a bunch of hits just to get a reasonably capable Game Week 29 team, I'd rather play a free at 29. Because even just for example, like intuitively look at these drops here, like I have to admit, you're so knees deep in players from Luton and Bournemouth, and also forcing transfers ahead of the time. Whereas, for example, with the previous draft, if you can keep Salah in your team, how much nicer is that? Because of course, even within here, like you're losing Tony, for example, to make sure that you can actually adequately go Salah and Palmer in 30. Whereas, of course, you don't have to do so in the previous draft. Like things like that, I think are
mm,
quite important. For me, from a team structure point of view, I'd much rather have the players that I want to have in a few weeks' team already within my team, and that kind of feels like the case with the sort of free hit 29 structure, as opposed to this
yeah,
one where, of course, the big guns, you're sort of booking transfers for them in the future. And we know time and time again, sometimes the big guns do hurt you no matter what, like Foden,
yeah,
of course, shout out Foden,
absolutely.
who did nothing in my double game 25. But
Michael says, okay, let's see, need your wildcard. Trini says wildcard 28, a dead prospect. Yep, as Fran already just said, Holland, I'm going to go without Holland probably, and
mm-hmm,
it's going to be terrible. And without Foden, obviously. So it's going to be really bad. Mr. Blanky says buy Regulon or Doughty. I would go for Doughty. There's no doubt right now.
yeah,
Unless you were looking at a
I.
very long horizon of all the game weeks, and
Mm-hmm.
then maybe I would go for
That's a good point,
Regulon.
actually. I've
Yeah,
noticed actually on these inverted decay
yeah.
solves that you somehow Regulon just gets spliced in there
Yes,
because he
yes,
kind of covers
yes.
some weird fixtures that are quite nice, especially like even
Yep,
like game week 30, arguably. But look, it's tough. I think I'd definitely go with Doughty. There's short term value there. Take that short term
yeah.
value.
Fair
Sell
enough,
Walker has to
fair
be
enough.
on. Same sort of. I think we concluded on that previously. Sell has to
Yeah,
be on. Should you
yeah.
hold Richarlison? I think just wait for news from Ange Postecoglou because
Hmm.
obviously if he's got news and Richarlison's back for Game Week 30, then I'd probably still keep him because that Game Week 30 game is really, really good. Now, you're probably going to lose additional value on Richarlison, but I think it depends on are there any players in the short term that you want so bad that you need to sell Richarlison for? If not, then of course just hold Richarlison, in my opinion. It comes down to that, really, because it's like, for example, if I was to mention someone like Palmer, he actually has a really good fixture this week. So if you want to sell Richarlison for Palmer,
Yep.
I think that makes sense. On the other hand, for example, if you just simply want to go for someone like let's say, I don't Nottingham Forest mid or a Bowen, for example. Yes, of course, there's a lot of short term value there, but Richarlison could be a really good pick going forwards. I'd still probably make the transfer to sell Richarlison. Um, but it also comes down to, once again, if we get an update on his availability for Game Week 29, and of course, whether we actually think he's going to be fit and ready to play for Game Week 30. Because I think the Brazilian national team wants to call him up. So we'll have to see what happens and
Yeah,
monitor
that
that
is
too.
very important context that if Richarlison is
Yeah.
saying on social media that he is fit, it's probably because he wants to go away on national duty.
Right. Because he if he goes away, it
So
actually makes him worse in theory, right? For Game Week 30.
exactly,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Which
Yes,
I
because
think
he
sort
might
of leads to
play
a sell.
on, let's say, when he's half fit and might aggravate his injury, which is We've seen players do that so many times, right? It's not the first time, nor will it be the last time.
Yep.
So that's that. Thoughts on Barkley versus
I
Chong?
think
Barkley
Barkley for
100%.
sure. Yep.
Chong doesn't have the minutes. I've seen Chong's minutes. Again, there has been a lot of talk recently about going for ex-United players because Elanga is the other one.
Right.
So Elanga is appearing in Mikel's
Free hit
Souls
souls as
because
well.
he is
Free hit. Yep.
extremely highly rated by
Mm-hmm.
Mikel's algorithm.
Yep. His underlying stats are
Again,
also just subpar.
oh
Like
yes,
honestly,
yeah,
like Chong's
yeah,
stats. That
exactly,
is. Yeah.
exactly. Chong's are just he's I don't know if you want to call it just lucky, but he has lucked into some insanely good situations. Now you
Yeah.
would say, okay, that's
Like the
skill
Liverpool
to be
goal,
in
for
those
example.
situations. Exactly,
Yeah.
all of those, I think.
Yeah.
So it just makes me feel like this is not repeatable, unlike certain players. So definitely Barkley. I'm not, and if you go for Barkley, which I am as well, let me tell you that don't expect anything other than 4 points. That's what you're going for. I think the win you will get is probably in EV. I don't just don't keep any expectations of any
Nah, man,
real
you're going for a
points wins.
screamer. You're going for a screamer.
Oh God,
Um,
if that happens, my God.
yeah, I'll cry a little bit. Esteban is not leaving my ban list until next season. Fair enough, Jenny.
Yeah,
Like, and it
yeah.
comes down to what we were saying about selling Esteban as well. Like, you just can't guarantee his minutes going forwards, um, even though they have significant injuries. Barat says, would you suggest to hold triple captain for another week? Personally, I would actually slam it on Solanke. If you still have it, I'd
Yeah,
slam it on Solanke because
yeah.
these fixtures are disgusting. They're disgustingly good. On 34, who knows? You might be free hitting, you might not be free hitting, but also on 34, I think even just looking at the captaincies that we would sort of expect, like, I mean, I guess you could captain like a Crystal Palace player, a United player, but do you really want to? Do you really want to?
Oh, triple captain. Oh God, no,
I
that's
don't
not
think so,
happening.
right?
Yeah,
So,
no.
like, maybe
I
I would
think you
actually,
just need
I would,
to.
if you have the chance to triple captain Eze, like, fair play. But I just think it's such a reach for me, right now to sort of laud him basically as an amazing triple captaincy option for game week,
No, if you don't
34.
go for that, you should go for game week 36.
Yeah,
Whomever doubles in 36, just go for triple
yeah,
captaincy.
one
I
of
think
those.
Palmer is pretty decent. If I know that fixture is not likely to go into 36 now, but
Yeah,
previously
no,
when
it's
it
true
was
actually.
slated to go into 36, Palmer would have been an excellent triple captaincy choice. I think you would have gone for it if you had the choice.
Why?
You're
Because I
just
just irrationally
wanting
love
to go
Palmer.
for
No,
yeah.
I would say the EV was there.
Of course it
Um,
was. Of course it was.
another
Irfan
sort of
says
point.
Foden. Oh, sorry.
Ooh,
You want
no,
to?
go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, Foden to Bowen and Gordon to Barkley slash Elanga worth -4. Don't have free hit. I think so. That's actually pretty good, if I'm being honest. You don't have a free hit, so I don't know if you want to prep for 34 as well, double game week 34, because Newcastle likely are going to have a double game week, and as long as Gordon is alive, he's going to play 90 minutes right now.
Do you think the Gordon transfer is worth it though? That's what I'm trying to say. Like for this
That's
week.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I, I,
Okay. Yeah.
I I
Sorry. Yeah,
think
that's a good
you
point. Yeah.
should think about the Gordon transfer
Yeah.
because he has a double game week in 34 potentially. I
Hmm.
think one of those is probably fine. I
Yeah. I
would
think
go for Foden to Bowen,
Foden to Bowen
Barkley rather.
feels nice. Bowen or Barkley.
It
Yeah, for
does.
sure. Bowen or Barkley.
It does. Yeah. You should look at the expected value
It's actually
and
roughly the
go for
same.
which are.
I think.
It is.
Because
It is. I
it's
yeah.
like 0.1 EV difference for me actually. Bowen and Barkley. So, but that was obviously
Oh.
if I was to run a free hit 34 route, and I'm more than likely not going for it. So,
Yeah.
and
That's
Trini,
the best solution.
last question, which is in which game week is Reguilon getting his injury? Hopefully not 29. So, hopefully after that.
He doesn't play for Manchester United, so probably not. Because if he were playing for United, he would have gotten injured
I
already.
see. I see. It's the United medical staff, isn't it?
Yes, 100% it is the United medical staff. Don't want to call people out, but they should definitely look for a new job.
Fair enough. Right, so that wraps up the episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciated you having on. This was a very long-winded episode, but I think it's also just worth talking about wild cards, little changes between free at 29 and 34, but also even discussing for me, just a regular FPL player who's also busted his wild card early. What the path is now, particularly jumping into the uncertainty that I did, and then also sort of reevaluating, of course, based on the most up-to-date information on 34 and 37. What our plans are generally speaking. Now, going forwards, I mean, are you going to tell us which sort of wild card you're leaning to right now, strategy
Yeah, I
wise?
think free hit 34 for sure.
Okay, interesting. Yeah,
Although these recent changes as of last let's say last couple of hours. I need to rerun
They need
all
to
the
be
scenarios
evaluated.
based on
I
that
see.
now.
Yeah.
But I think I still stick to 34 because, as I said, I am just too skeptical about not having a single impactful chip for the rest of the season.
Okay.
So I might just run with that
And
logic
is there a
and
substantial
yeah,
EV gap
leave
for
it
you,
with me.
like running your souls with inverted decay and things like that, or
Yeah.
yeah?
So that's why
Okay.
I said that Free 29 is, I think, 8 EV clear across 11 game weeks, which is not that great if I'm being perfectly. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
can definitely get away with the suboptimal strategy in this scenario,
Right.
but I think with the updated fixtures, it might even
Widen the gap.
increase the gap.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and so I'm not trying to be coy. I'm just actually extremely uncertain. As soon as I have certainty, I think I'll post something because I am comparing all the fixture scenarios. I might post a similar comparison like I did last week when I was evaluating all the chip strategies. So that is something people can look out for. And other than that, I
Sounds
guess
good.
this is it for this week. Hopefully, you enjoyed it. Subscribe before you leave because uh,
Oh,
you know
did we? Yeah, because
you're
we'd
here at
like
this
to get to
time.
500 subscribers as well, if possible. So
Exactly.
just a little
So
gentle nudge. And thank you guys